The courtroom buzzed with hushed murmurs as people filled the benches of Denver Family Court. Judge Rebecca Williams, respected and known for her unwavering fairness, entered the room, her black robe billowing slightly behind her. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the diverse faces that waited anxiously for her decision. This was another day at work, another family case, another child's future hanging in the balance. She settled into her chair, straightening the papers before her, and called the court to order with a swift bang of her gavel. Today's case involved 8-year-old Elijah Marshall, a quiet African-American boy who had been shuffled through multiple foster homes without finding stability. His latest foster parents, James and Patricia Turner, sat nervously in the plaintiff's section, waiting to relinquish their responsibilities. They were decent people, but overwhelmed by financial struggles. Rebecca glanced at Elijah, seated at the defendant's table next to Sarah Martinez, the dedicated social worker assigned to his case. Elijah was a small, slender child with deep, searching eyes. Though just a boy, his eyes told a story of hardship, moving from one unstable situation to another. "Ms. Martinez," Rebecca began, "can you please summarize Elijah's situation?" Sarah stood, holding a thick file. "Yes, Your Honor. Elijah Marshall has been in the foster care system since infancy. He has lived in 7 different homes in his 8 years of life. Each placement ended due to various reasons: financial issues, neglect, or incompatibility. Elijah has shown remarkable resilience, but understandably, he struggles with emotional attachment." Rebecca's heart tightened as she listened. These cases were always tough, but something about Elijah tugged at her heartstrings more deeply than usual. She studied him again, noticing how tightly he clung to the edge of the table, knuckles pale with tension. "Elijah," Rebecca's voice softened, "would you like to say anything today?" The courtroom fell silent. Elijah slowly raised his eyes, looking directly at the judge. The quiet murmurs ceased entirely, all eyes on the little boy. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling but clear. "You're my mom." Gasps echoed through the room. Sarah looked shocked. James and Patricia exchanged confused glances. Rebecca herself froze, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "Excuse me?" she asked, trying to regain her composure. Elijah swallowed hard, repeating with unwavering conviction, "You're my mom. I know it. I don't know why, but I just know." Rebecca felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She glanced down at Elijah's file again, searching for details about his biological parents. But there was nothing, just vague notes about him being found abandoned as an infant. "Are you sure, Elijah?" Sarah asked gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Yes." He nodded vigorously, his eyes never leaving Rebecca. "I remember your face. I remember you." Rebecca's mind raced. How was this possible? She had lost her own son shortly after birth. The hospital had declared him dead. She had never fully recovered from that devastating loss. Could Elijah be telling the truth? She took a steadying breath, determined to maintain her professionalism. "We need to conduct a DNA test immediately," she announced, her voice steady despite her trembling heart. Sarah nodded quickly, jotting down notes. "I will arrange for that right away, Your Honor." James Turner stood abruptly, his voice filled with confusion. "Your Honor, this has to be a mistake. We've cared for Elijah for months, and he's never said anything like this before." Rebecca raised her hand, signaling him to sit. "I understand, Mr. Turner, but we must verify the truth." Elijah sat quietly now, eyes wide and hopeful, as if he'd been waiting forever for this moment. Rebecca felt her composure slipping, her heart pounding in her chest. Could this child truly be her son? After adjourning the session, Rebecca retreated to her chambers, her mind swirling. She paced the floor, heart racing with anxiety and hope. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah entered cautiously, clutching Elijah's file. "Your Honor, I found something," Sarah said urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elijah's birth records are suspicious. There are discrepancies, significant ones. The hospital he was supposedly born in, Riverside Memorial, has a history of falsifying records." Rebecca felt the room spin. "What are you saying, Ms. Martinez?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm saying there's a chance Elijah could indeed be your son. Your child might not have died as you were told." Rebecca sank into her chair, her legs weak beneath her. "I need answers," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "I need the truth." "We will get to the bottom of this," Sarah reassured her firmly. "The DNA test will tell us definitively." Meanwhile, Elijah sat in the waiting room outside, his heart heavy with hope and fear. He clutched a small, worn photo of a woman he'd found in his belongings long ago, a woman who looked remarkably like Judge Rebecca Williams. For years, he had held on to this picture, dreaming of finding her one day. Rebecca gathered herself, wiping her eyes and taking a deep breath. "Let's get that test done as soon as possible. And Ms. Martinez, thank you." Sarah nodded with determination. "Of course, Your Honor. We'll uncover the truth." As Sarah left, Rebecca sat alone, her mind filled with memories of loss and heartache. Could this be the miracle she had prayed for? Could Elijah be the son she had mourned all these years? Outside the door, Elijah waited patiently, his small heart filled with hope. He had finally found her. He had found his mother. He just hoped she would believe him and finally bring him home. Rebecca couldn't sleep that night, her mind plagued with uncertainty and endless questions. The thought that Elijah might be her lost son tormented her. Memories she had long buried began to resurface vividly. Her baby's birth, the overwhelming joy followed by the unbearable grief when the doctors had told her that her newborn son had not survived. For years, she had carried this pain silently, throwing herself into her work to numb the heartache. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at the courthouse early, unable to concentrate on anything but the pending DNA test. Sarah had arranged for the test to be conducted urgently, and the results were expected by the end of the day. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited for the truth to be revealed. Sarah was equally restless, her instincts as a social worker urging her to delve deeper into Elijah's complicated past. She decided to pay a visit to Riverside Memorial Hospital, hoping to uncover more about the suspicious circumstances surrounding Elijah's birth. Arriving at the hospital, Sarah sought out Jennifer Kirkland, a retired nurse whose name appeared multiple times in Elijah's fragmented records. Jennifer was hesitant at first, her eyes clouded with caution, but as Sarah explained the gravity of the situation, Jennifer's demeanor softened. She invited Sarah into her modest apartment, her hands trembling as she pulled out a box filled with old files and notes. "I've been holding on to these for years," Jennifer began, her voice shaky. "I saw things at that hospital, terrible things. Babies being taken from their mothers, records being falsified. I tried to speak up, but I was threatened." Sarah's heart raced. "Do you recognize the name Elijah Marshall?" Jennifer nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. He was one of those babies. His records were altered. He was never meant to be found." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "Do you know who his mother is?" Jennifer hesitated, then nodded again. "Yes. Elijah's mother is Judge Rebecca Williams. They told her he was dead." Sarah gasped, a chill running down her spine. She quickly took photographs of the documents, thanking Jennifer profusely before rushing back to the courthouse to share the findings with Rebecca. Back at the courthouse, Rebecca anxiously awaited Sarah's return. When Sarah burst into her chambers, breathless and agitated, Rebecca stood up quickly, sensing the urgency in Sarah's eyes. "Your Honor, I spoke with a nurse from Riverside Memorial," Sarah said, handing over the photographs of the files. "These documents prove that Elijah is indeed your son. They falsified his death certificate. Your son is alive." Rebecca's hands trembled as she took the photographs, her eyes scanning the incriminating documents. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision. She sank into her chair, overwhelmed by a mix of joy, relief, anger, and grief. Her son was alive, and she had missed 8 years of his life because of a monstrous lie. Just then, her office phone rang sharply, jolting her back to reality. It was the lab calling with the DNA results. The technician's voice was steady and clear. "Your Honor, the results confirm a match. Elijah Marshall is your biological son." Rebecca's heart nearly exploded with emotion. She hung up the phone and looked at Sarah, her voice breaking. "It's true. Elijah is my son." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "This is incredible news, Your Honor. But there's more to this than just your reunion. There's a criminal element involved. The nurse mentioned an illegal operation at Riverside Memorial." Rebecca's face hardened. "We need to take this to the FBI. This isn't just about me and Elijah. There could be countless other families affected. At that moment, there was a soft knock on the door. It opened slightly, revealing Elijah, clutching his small worn photograph. His eyes were wide, filled with uncertainty and hope. Rebecca stood up slowly, her heart aching as she looked at her son. She moved towards him, kneeling to his level. "Elijah," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's true. You are my son." Elijah's eyes filled with tears, and without a word he threw his arms around Rebecca's neck. Mother and son embraced tightly, their tears mingling, the weight of years of separation lifting in that single, powerful moment. Sarah quietly left the room, giving them privacy. She knew their journey was far from over. The truth had been unveiled, but the battle for justice had just begun. Elijah's reunion with his mother was just the first step in a much larger fight, one that would expose deep corruption and demand accountability for countless stolen lives. In the days following their emotional reunion, Rebecca and Elijah began to navigate the delicate and complex process of building their relationship. Elijah moved into Rebecca's home, a spacious yet cozy house that felt both foreign and comforting to him. Rebecca was filled with mixed emotions, overjoyed to have her son back, but deeply troubled by the time they had lost and the circumstances that had separated them. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jennifer began working closely with the FBI, gathering and sorting through the substantial evidence of corruption at Riverside Memorial Hospital. Agent Marcus Powell, a seasoned FBI investigator, was assigned to the case. His arrival marked a significant shift as the investigation intensified. Marcus was meticulous, demanding detailed statements from Jennifer and a full account from Sarah about her findings. Marcus called a meeting at the FBI's Denver field office, attended by Rebecca, Sarah, and Jennifer. The conference room was stark and serious, with a large whiteboard dominating one wall, covered in notes, photos, and connecting lines that mapped out a network of corruption. "We've uncovered more than just a single case of child abduction," Marcus began gravely. "Riverside Memorial appears to be part of a much larger operation involving illegal adoptions and child trafficking. This has been ongoing for decades, implicating multiple high-ranking hospital officials." Rebecca felt her blood boil. How could this happen? How many other mothers were told their children were dead? Marcus sighed deeply. "We're still investigating, but preliminary findings suggest dozens, possibly hundreds. It's a well-organized network, sophisticated and cruel." Jennifer spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. "There were always rumors. Staff members were paid to remain silent, and those who spoke up faced severe consequences. We need to track down everyone involved," Sarah insisted, "and we need to help the families affected." Marcus nodded. "Our priority is gathering solid evidence to prosecute those responsible. Jennifer, your testimony will be crucial. Sarah, will need your expertise and access to child welfare records to cross-reference missing children." Rebecca clenched her fists. "I will help in any way I can. This goes beyond Elijah and me. We owe it to every family affected to bring these criminals to justice." Marcus looked at her firmly. "Your cooperation will be invaluable, Judge Williams. But be aware, this investigation may put you and Elijah at risk." Rebecca met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm prepared to face whatever comes our way." Back at home, Rebecca and Elijah spent their evenings trying to build a sense of normalcy. Elijah was curious and reserved, struggling to reconcile his turbulent past with his new reality. Rebecca did her best to create a safe and loving environment, hoping to rebuild trust. One evening, while looking through Elijah's belongings, Rebecca found a small notebook filled with sketches. She flipped through the pages, her heart aching at the detailed drawings of places Elijah had lived, each image accompanied by short, emotional notes about his experiences. "Did you draw these?" Rebecca asked gently as Elijah entered the room. Elijah nodded shyly. "Yes, it helped me remember things. Some places were okay, but most weren't." Rebecca knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Elijah. I promise you're safe now. We're going to get through this together." Elijah looked up at her, eyes filled with vulnerability. "Are you really going to catch the bad people?" Rebecca hugged him tightly. "Yes, we will. They won't hurt anyone else." Meanwhile, Marcus's team conducted extensive surveillance, identifying key players within the hospital's network. Names began to surface: doctors, administrators, and even local politicians who had facilitated the cover-ups. As the investigation gained momentum, news began to leak to the media, creating public outrage and putting further pressure on the FBI. Rebecca received a phone call one night, a distorted voice delivering a chilling warning. "Stop meddling in things you don't understand, or you'll lose Elijah again. This time, forever." Fear shot through Rebecca, but it quickly turned to anger. She reported the threat to Marcus, who tightened security around their home. "They're trying to scare you," Marcus told her firmly, "but it means we're close." Rebecca resolved to stand strong. She knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, but her determination only grew. Elijah deserved justice, and so did every other child who had suffered at the hands of this vile operation. Together with Sarah, Jennifer, and Marcus, Rebecca vowed not to rest until every person involved faced the consequences of their actions. As the FBI investigation expanded, tensions rose dramatically. Agent Marcus Powell uncovered unsettling connections involving high-ranking officials, and his team faced increasing resistance from powerful entities intent on keeping their dark secrets hidden. The web of corruption was more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Rebecca struggled to balance her responsibilities as a judge and as a mother while also coping with the constant threat looming over them. She was constantly vigilant, noticing suspicious cars lingering near her home and strange individuals following her from the courthouse. Her anxiety intensified as she worried for Elijah's safety. One afternoon, while Elijah was playing in the backyard under the watchful eyes of an FBI agent stationed outside their home, Rebecca received another threatening phone call at work. This time, the voice was clearer, colder, and more menacing. "You've been warned, Judge Williams," the voice snarled. "Drop the investigation or pay the ultimate price." Rebecca's blood ran cold, but she steadied her voice. "I won't be intimidated. You won't silence me." The caller laughed harshly. "Then prepare for the consequences." Rebecca immediately contacted Marcus, who rushed to her office. "We need to take extra precautions," Marcus warned. "They're desperate now. We must ensure you and Elijah are protected at all times." Marcus arranged for round-the-clock security at Rebecca's home and workplace. Still, the threats took a toll on both her and Elijah. Elijah sensed his mother's distress and became more withdrawn and fearful. Rebecca was determined to reassure him, but she knew their lives had irrevocably changed. In the midst of this turmoil, Marcus received a significant lead. A whistleblower from Riverside Memorial Hospital had come forward, willing to provide critical information in exchange for protection. The whistleblower, Dr. Linda Bennett, was a former pediatrician at the hospital who had been forced into silence years ago. Marcus arranged a discreet meeting in a secure location with Rebecca, Sarah, and Jennifer in attendance. Dr. Bennett arrived looking anxious but resolved. "I've lived with guilt for years," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I witnessed babies being stolen from their mothers, documents being forged. I was threatened into silence, but I can't stay silent any longer." Dr. Bennett provided detailed accounts, including names of key figures involved in the operation and how the process was carried out. She revealed that wealthy families desperate for children paid large sums for the abducted infants, and a vast network had ensured the operation's secrecy. "They have connections in law enforcement, politics, and even the judiciary," Dr. Bennett warned ominously. "This goes far beyond Riverside Memorial. It's systemic." Rebecca felt sickened and enraged. "How can we stop them?" Marcus was grim but resolute. "With this information, we can apply pressure. We'll proceed carefully, build a solid case, and prepare for arrests. But it's crucial we keep this quiet until we're ready to strike." Meanwhile, the threats against Rebecca intensified. One evening, while driving home, her car was forced off the road by an unidentified vehicle. Shaken but unharmed, Rebecca reported the incident immediately to Marcus. "They're escalating," Marcus said sternly. "We need to move you and Elijah to a safe house immediately." Reluctantly, Rebecca agreed, knowing it was the safest option for Elijah. She explained the situation gently to her son, trying to reassure him that everything would be all right. But Elijah's fear was palpable. "Will we ever be safe?" he asked tearfully. Rebecca hugged him tightly. "Yes, Elijah. I promise you, we'll be safe again." As they settled into the FBI safe house, Marcus and his team intensified their efforts, determined to bring down the corrupt network once and for all. Rebecca, though fearful for her and Elijah's safety, remained steadfast in her resolve. She knew they had crossed a point of no return, and justice needed to be served, not just for Elijah, but for countless other stolen children and heartbroken families. Rebecca drew strength from Elijah's resilience and love. She vowed to protect him at all costs, knowing their bond would carry them through the darkest times yet to come. Life in the FBI safe house was unsettling for both Rebecca and Elijah. The unfamiliar surroundings, constant presence of armed agents, and the ongoing sense of impending danger made normal life feel impossible. Yet they did their best to maintain some semblance of routine. Elijah was enrolled in homeschooling, with tutors coming daily to provide him education. Still, the boy's unease was evident, and he frequently woke up from nightmares. Rebecca felt a deep ache watching her son suffer, but she also knew they had no choice. She stayed strong for him, knowing that the investigation was reaching a critical point. Marcus and his team were methodically building their case, gathering more evidence each day and identifying more key figures in the network. Public outrage had grown as the media got wind of the shocking revelations about Riverside Memorial Hospital, making headlines nationwide. One day, while reviewing case files with Marcus in the safe house's secure conference room, Rebecca received a surprising phone call from Judge Amelia Hartwell, a respected colleague and longtime friend. "Rebecca," Amelia began, her voice tense, "I've been approached by some very powerful people trying to discourage me from supporting your investigation. They're getting desperate, and they're not afraid to threaten or bribe anyone they think can influence you." Rebecca felt her heart sink. "Amelia, are you in danger?" Amelia sighed deeply. "Not yet, but they're persistent. They're watching everyone close to you, Rebecca. Be careful." Marcus, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. "Judge Hartwell, your information could be crucial. Would you be willing to cooperate formally with the investigation?" "Absolutely," Amelia replied firmly. "I won't be intimidated. These criminals need to be brought to justice." "Thank you," Rebecca said gratefully. "Your support means the world." After the call, Marcus looked at Rebecca seriously. "This is escalating faster than we anticipated. We must move quickly before they cause more harm." In the following days, FBI agents executed multiple raids across the city, targeting homes and offices of key figures involved in the child trafficking network. Several arrests were made, but many suspects went into hiding, leaving behind evidence hastily destroyed or hidden. Rebecca, meanwhile, felt increasingly isolated. Even in the secure confines of the safe house, she sensed that she was being watched. Elijah remained anxious, often clinging to her, sensing her fear and uncertainty. One evening, while Elijah was asleep, Rebecca stepped out into the safe house's secluded backyard for some air. The quiet was suddenly shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. She turned sharply, her heart racing as she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was an armed intruder wearing a mask. "Don't move," the intruder hissed, pointing a gun at her. "Come with me quietly or the boy gets hurt." Rebecca froze, terror gripping her. She glanced back at the house, knowing agents were inside but too far away to help in time. Summoning her courage, she spoke firmly. "Who sent you?" "That's not your concern," he snarled, stepping closer. "You're causing too much trouble." Suddenly, a shot rang out, and the intruder collapsed to the ground, wounded. Marcus and his team rushed out from the house, guns drawn. "Get inside now!" Marcus shouted. Rebecca hurried inside, shaken but unharmed. Marcus followed moments later, visibly tense. "We got him," he confirmed. "He's alive and will be interrogated. They know we're close, and they're desperate." Elijah, awakened by the commotion, ran to Rebecca, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, are you okay?" Rebecca hugged him tightly. "I'm fine, Elijah. We're safe now." Marcus, though relieved, warned them gravely. "This isn't over. They won't stop until they're taken down completely. We need to end this quickly." Rebecca nodded resolutely. "Then let's finish it. We'll do whatever it takes." Despite the danger and fear, Rebecca felt more determined than ever. The network had crossed a line, and she was ready to fight with everything she had. She knew the risks, But Elijah's safety and the pursuit of justice for all those affected by this horrific operation gave her strength to face the daunting challenges ahead. They were on the verge of exposing one of the most insidious criminal networks the country had ever seen, and she was ready to make any sacrifice necessary to ensure justice was served. Following the attempted attack at the safe house, Marcus and his team intensified their efforts. The captured intruder, under interrogation, finally cracked and provided crucial details about the network's inner workings. Names of key players emerged, including influential figures in law enforcement and politics. Marcus knew this was a breakthrough, but it also meant the fight was far from over. Rebecca and Elijah were moved to an even more secure location, a fortified residence outside the city with enhanced surveillance and a dedicated FBI team stationed permanently. Although the move provided increased safety, it also heightened the sense of confinement and isolation for both mother and son. Determined not to let fear control her, Rebecca insisted on staying actively involved in the investigation. With Marcus's guidance, she helped prepare legal strategies and evidence for upcoming prosecutions. She collaborated closely with prosecutors, briefing them on the intricacies of family law to strengthen their cases against those involved. Meanwhile, public support continued to swell. News of Rebecca and Elijah's harrowing ordeal galvanized citizens nationwide, prompting large-scale protests demanding justice and accountability. Social media campaigns amplified their voices, putting immense pressure on authorities to take swift action. Rebecca's colleague, Judge Amelia Hartwell, provided pivotal testimony detailing the threats she had received and identifying individuals attempting to obstruct justice. Amelia's courageous stand inspired other officials to come forward, creating a ripple effect of revelations that further exposed the depths of corruption. One morning, Marcus visited Rebecca at the new safe house with significant news. "We've received approval for a series of high-profile arrests," he announced. "We're taking down major players simultaneously. This will be a massive blow to their operation." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. "When will this happen?" "Tonight," Marcus replied confidently. "We'll conduct coordinated raids across the city. It's risky, but we believe it's our best shot at dismantling their operation." That evening, Rebecca and Elijah waited anxiously for updates. They watched the news closely, tense with anticipation. Reports began pouring in about multiple high-profile arrests, doctors, administrators, police officials, and even political figures being taken into custody. The media coverage was intense, the public reaction explosive. Marcus called later that night, relief evident in his voice. "It was successful. We captured several key figures and gathered extensive evidence. Their network is severely crippled." Rebecca exhaled deeply, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you, Marcus. This is incredible news." "We still have work to do," Marcus cautioned, "but this is a major victory. We'll now move forward with trials and prosecutions. The evidence we have is overwhelming." Rebecca hugged Elijah tightly, feeling hope blossom within her for the first time in weeks. "We're getting closer to justice, Elijah." Elijah smiled softly, sensing his mother's relief. "Does this mean we'll be safe now, Mom?" Rebecca nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, it does. We're finally turning the tide." In the days that followed, the public outcry only grew louder. Pressure mounted on authorities to ensure transparent and swift legal proceedings. Rebecca continued her tireless work behind the scenes, preparing for the upcoming trials and offering support to other affected families who had begun reaching out, inspired by her bravery. Despite the challenges and threats still lurking in the shadows, Rebecca felt a newfound strength. The tide was indeed turning, and she was resolved to see this through to the end, knowing that justice was finally within reach. Together, she and Elijah faced the uncertain future with renewed courage, determined to emerge stronger from their harrowing journey. Following the successful series of arrests, Marcus and his team were deep in the painstaking process of cataloging evidence, interviewing suspects, and securing testimony. The sheer volume of evidence uncovered was overwhelming. Financial records, secret ledgers, taped conversations, and testimony from whistleblowers all pointed toward a sprawling, well-entrenched criminal enterprise. Rebecca became even more deeply involved in the legal preparations. Her expertise as a judge proved invaluable as she assisted in organizing the evidence, into a cohesive, compelling narrative. Prosecutors relied heavily on her insights, understanding her unique perspective as both a legal expert and a victim of the crimes. Meanwhile, Elijah, though safer now, struggled with anxiety. The constant reminders of their ordeal, the FBI presence, the isolation, and the ongoing media coverage made it hard for him to adjust. Rebecca, sensitive to her son's struggles, arranged for counseling sessions to help him cope with the trauma. Elijah began working with a compassionate therapist named Dr. Grace Patel, who specialized in trauma recovery for children. Dr. Patel quickly built a rapport with Elijah, helping him process his experiences through art and storytelling. Each session brought small but meaningful progress, giving Rebecca hope that her son could eventually find peace. During this intense period, more victims and families affected by the network began to emerge. Public outrage remained high, leading to additional pressure on authorities to expedite proceedings. Rebecca, inspired by these brave families coming forward, began coordinating support groups, offering comfort and legal guidance. One afternoon, Marcus called Rebecca with urgent news. "We have a key witness who's ready to testify publicly. Her testimony could be the linchpin of our case." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Who is it?" "Dr. Linda Bennett," Marcus replied. "She has agreed to testify openly in court about everything she witnessed at Riverside Memorial. Her credibility and detailed knowledge will be invaluable." "This is huge," Rebecca said, feeling a wave of relief. "Do you think she's safe?" "We're taking every precaution," Marcus assured her. "She's in protective custody now. Her courage will inspire others to speak out." Dr. Bennett's public testimony was broadcast nationally. Her powerful emotional account detailed how newborns were systematically taken from their mothers, documents falsified, and threats used to silence staff. Her bravery resonated deeply, prompting additional whistleblowers to come forward, further bolstering the case. As the trial date approached, the pressure mounted, media attention intensified, and public anticipation grew. Rebecca remained steadfast, working tirelessly alongside prosecutors. Her meticulous preparation helped solidify the case against the accused, ensuring that each piece of evidence was presented effectively. Elijah continued to make steady progress in therapy, gradually opening up about his experiences. Dr. Patel praised his bravery, noting that sharing his feelings was a critical step toward healing. Rebecca found strength in his resilience, determined to create a safe and stable future for him once justice was served. In the final days leading up to the trial, Rebecca addressed a large gathering of affected families and supporters, her voice filled with determination. "We stand together today, united in our fight for justice. The road has been difficult, filled with fear and uncertainty. But we have shown that courage and unity can overcome even the darkest forces. We are not victims. We are survivors, and together we will see justice done." The crowd erupted in applause, inspired by her words. Rebecca looked out over the sea of faces, each one a testament to the power of perseverance. As she stood tall and resolute, she knew they were on the brink of a historic moment. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses courageous, and public support unwavering. Justice was finally within reach. The day of the trial arrived amid intense public scrutiny. Media outlets from across the nation converged outside the courthouse, their cameras and microphones capturing every moment. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and tension, as people from all walks of life gathered to witness the beginning of one of the most significant legal battles in recent history. Rebecca, accompanied by Marcus, Sarah, and Jennifer, entered the courthouse early. Dressed in a professional suit, her face resolute, she was acutely aware of the enormous weight of this day. Elijah, though protected at home by trusted agents, remained at the forefront of her mind. She drew strength from the knowledge that she was fighting not only for him, but for countless others who had suffered similar fates. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The judge presiding over the case, Judge Henry Lewis, was known for his fairness and integrity, qualities Rebecca respected deeply. As the courtroom settled, the prosecution and defense teams prepared their opening statements. The lead prosecutor, Sandra Mitchell, stood confidently before the jury, her voice clear and compelling. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence you will hear in this trial will shock and horrify you. It will reveal a deeply embedded criminal enterprise that systematically stole newborn babies from their mothers, falsified death certificates, and sold these innocent children to the highest bidder. We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendants before you are guilty of these heinous crimes. The defense attorney, Arthur Reynolds, attempted to cast doubt and deflect blame, emphasizing procedural mistakes and questioning witness credibility. But the sheer gravity and abundance of evidence were difficult to undermine. Witness after witness took the stand, providing harrowing accounts of their experiences. Dr. Linda Bennett's testimony was particularly impactful. She recounted in vivid detail how the hospital had systematically carried out these abductions, describing her terror when she had tried to speak out and the severe repercussions she faced. When it was Rebecca's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. She took the stand, composed but visibly emotional. Her voice steady, she recounted the day she was told her newborn son had died, describing the overwhelming grief and devastation she endured. For 8 years, Rebecca said, her voice cracking slightly, I mourned my son, believing he had died. Instead, he was taken from me, sold like merchandise. The pain of that realization is indescribable. But today, I stand here not just as a victim, but as an advocate for justice. Elijah and all the other children affected deserve to know that the system will protect them, that justice will prevail. Her testimony resonated deeply, moving many in the courtroom to tears. The defense struggled to cross-examine her, unable to diminish the profound impact of her words. Over the subsequent days, the prosecution presented an overwhelming array of evidence: financial records tracing payments, intercepted communications between conspirators, and powerful testimonies from other affected families. Each piece meticulously built a damning narrative against the defendants. Marcus testified about the extensive investigation, detailing the threats and attempts at intimidation that he and his team had endured. His unwavering resolve only strengthened the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, public support outside the courtroom swelled. Demonstrations and vigils were held daily, with signs demanding justice for the stolen children and accountability from those responsible. The trial became a focal point of national discourse, shedding light on systemic corruption and prompting calls for widespread reform. As the trial progressed, Rebecca felt a growing sense of hope and determination. Though emotionally exhausting, each day brought them closer to justice. The defense's case weakened further as additional witnesses corroborated the prosecution's allegations, leaving the jury with little doubt about the guilt of those on trial. Finally, the prosecution rested its case, confident they had presented irrefutable evidence. The courtroom braced for the defense's last-ditch efforts, but it was clear that the tide had turned decisively in favor of justice. As Rebecca left the courtroom that evening, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The battle was far from over, but the path toward justice had never been clearer. The trial continued into its second week, with each passing day intensifying the scrutiny on the defendants. The weight of the testimonies, combined with the irrefutable evidence presented by the prosecution, left the defense scrambling for strategies to undermine the case. The media dubbed the proceedings the trial of a generation, with news networks broadcasting live updates and panel discussions dissecting every legal maneuver. Rebecca remained steadfast, her presence in the courtroom unwavering. She was no longer just a judge or a victim. She had become the face of resilience and justice. Elijah, though shielded from the direct exposure of the trial, remained keenly aware of what was happening. At home, he watched news reports and listened to Rebecca's updates, clinging to the hope that the people who stole his childhood would finally face the consequences of their actions. Then came a turning point, one the defense had not anticipated. A previously unidentified whistleblower, a former hospital administrator, came forward unexpectedly. His identity had been protected due to threats on his life, but with mounting public pressure and the fear of being implicated himself, he agreed to testify under heavy security. The man, Richard Dawson, took the stand. His hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses, clearly rattled by the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. I was part of the system, Dawson admitted. I helped facilitate falsified documents and ensured that money flowed through the right channels to keep the operation hidden. I was paid handsomely to stay silent, and I did. Until now. His testimony was explosive. He detailed how doctors, nurses, and even law enforcement officials were bribed to look the other way. He provided concrete evidence of financial transactions, ledgers, bank statements, and email correspondences that connected high-profile individuals to the scandal. The courtroom was stunned into silence as he pointed toward the defendants. Those people over there? They orchestrated everything, and they will continue to do so unless they are stopped. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. This was it, the moment where the foundation of the criminal network would finally crumble. With Dawson's testimony, the defense's weak facade collapsed. The attorneys representing the accused scrambled to discredit him, citing his involvement in the operation as a means to taint his credibility. But the jury could see through the desperation. The weight of the documents, the corroborating testimonies, and the sheer gravity of what had been exposed made it nearly impossible for any rational doubt to exist. Outside the courthouse, the public's reaction was overwhelming. Protesters flooded the steps of the building, demanding harsh sentences for those responsible. Families who had lost children came forward in droves, hoping their own stolen babies might one day be found. Rebecca felt the enormity of it all pressing down on her. She had set out to find justice for Elijah, but this had become so much more than just their story. It was about the hundreds, possibly thousands of families affected by an unspeakable evil. She could feel history shifting beneath her feet, knowing that nothing would ever be the same after this trial. Marcus approached her as she sat quietly in the waiting room during a recess. "This is bigger than we ever imagined," he said, his expression a mix of triumph and exhaustion. "You should be proud of what you've done." She gave him a tired smile. "I won't feel proud until the verdict is read and Elijah can finally sleep without fear." Meanwhile, back at home, Elijah was watching the trial on television. His hands gripped the edges of his seat as he saw Dawson confess to everything. His heart pounded as he watched his mother sitting confidently in the courtroom, fighting for him and for so many others. For the first time, he truly believed that justice would be served. As the trial neared its end, the prosecution rested its case, confident that they had delivered an unshakable argument. The defense, realizing their inevitable defeat, began negotiating plea deals for lesser sentences in exchange for additional information. Rebecca knew the battle was nearly won, but as the final days of the trial loomed, she also knew that the real test, the moment of ultimate accountability, was still ahead, and she was ready. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the trial entered its final phase. The prosecution had presented a mountain of irrefutable evidence, while the defense, out of desperation, attempted last-ditch efforts to create doubt. But the weight of the testimonies, the confessions, and the damning financial trails left little room for maneuvering. Rebecca sat in the courtroom, hands folded in her lap, listening intently as the defense's final witness took the stand. The attorney representing the accused tried to paint a narrative of confusion, of administrative oversight rather than criminal conspiracy. However, the jury had heard too much. The puzzle had been fully assembled, and the picture it painted was devastating. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, a growing crowd of demonstrators demanded justice. Signs bearing messages like, "Bring them to justice," and "No more stolen children," were raised high, their voices creating a relentless chant that echoed through the city. The case had captured the nation's attention, and its outcome would set a precedent for generations to come. Marcus and his FBI team had spent the past few days tracking down additional fugitives tied to the conspiracy. Some had fled the country, but with international warrants in place, their escape was only temporary. The coordinated effort to dismantle the network was relentless, and one by one, the criminals who had stolen children from their families were being brought to justice. Back at the safe house, Elijah was glued to the television, watching the trial unfold in real time. He had never seen his mother fight so fiercely. Every time the camera panned to her, he saw the fire in her eyes, the unwavering determination in her posture. He understood now. This wasn't just about him. It was about all the other children who had been stolen, about ensuring no other family had to endure the pain he had suffered. "Mom's winning," he whispered to himself, clutching the small photo he had held on to for years, the one that had given him hope in the darkest times. As closing arguments began, the prosecution delivered a final, crushing blow. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sandra Mitchell, the lead prosecutor, began, "you have heard the evidence. You have seen the records. You have listened to the survivors. And now the power to bring justice is in your hands. These people didn't just falsify documents. They didn't just break the law. They tore families apart. They stole lives. It is time to hold them accountable. The defense attorney, visibly drained, attempted to counter, but the argument fell flat. The jury remained impassive, unmoved by the half-hearted justifications. They had already made up their minds. Rebecca exhaled deeply as the judge dismissed the court for deliberation. She knew it could take hours, possibly even days, but deep down, she felt a sense of certainty. Justice was inevitable. As she exited the courthouse, reporters bombarded her with questions. Judge Williams, do you believe the jury will convict? Do you think justice will finally be served? She paused briefly, looking directly into the cameras. I believe in the truth, she said firmly, and the truth has already been revealed. That evening, she sat with Elijah, holding his hand as they waited for the jury's decision. The boy looked up at her, his voice small but steady. Will everything be okay now, Mom? Rebecca kissed his forehead. Yes, Elijah, everything will be okay. But as she spoke the words, she knew the real test was still ahead. Would the system she had dedicated her life to uphold finally deliver justice? Or would the weight of corruption find a way to bend the scales once again? The answer would come soon enough. The jury had been deliberating for over 14 hours. The courthouse remained a hive of tension, with reporters camped outside, eager for any updates. Protesters and supporters alike filled the streets, their chants growing louder as the hours dragged on. The world was waiting for a verdict that would either affirm the integrity of the justice system or confirm the public's worst fears about institutional corruption. Rebecca sat in a private waiting room with Marcus, Sarah, and Sandra Mitchell. The exhaustion was visible on all their faces, but none of them dared to rest. Elijah, though shielded from the chaos, could feel the energy of the moment weighing down on him. Then came the announcement. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled rapidly, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Rebecca took her seat, her hands clenched together as she inhaled deeply. She could feel the weight of Elijah's gaze from the secure location where he watched remotely with his protection detail. The judge entered, and everyone in the room stood before being ordered to sit. The bailiff turned toward the jury. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The judge asked. The jury foreperson, an older woman with kind but resolute eyes, stood and cleared her throat. Yes, Your Honor, we have. The room fell into complete silence. On the charge of conspiracy to commit child trafficking, how does the jury find the defendant? Guilty. A loud murmur rippled through the room. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. The foreperson continued. On the charge of falsifying medical records and forging death certificates, how does the jury find the defendant? Guilty. The guilty verdicts continued to be read, one by one, as the gravity of the ruling settled in. By the time the foreperson had finished, each of the primary defendants had been found guilty on multiple counts. The judge then turned to the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, justice has been served today. Sentencing will be scheduled for next week. Gasps of relief, quiet sobs, and celebratory whispers filled the space. The weight of the moment crashed down on Rebecca, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the true, undeniable presence of hope. As Rebecca exited the courthouse, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward her. She paused, her grip tightening around Marcus's arm for a brief moment before she stepped forward to address the sea of people. Justice has prevailed today, but this is only the beginning. Families have been shattered by these crimes. Children have grown up without knowing their real parents. We have taken a step forward, but there is more work to do. A wave of applause erupted from the crowd, mixed with tears and cheers. The victims and their families, some of whom had suffered for years without answers, embraced each other, knowing that their pain had finally been acknowledged. That night, Rebecca returned to the safe house where Elijah was waiting. He ran into her arms the moment she walked in, bearing his face against her shoulder. Did we win? He asked, his voice small but hopeful. Rebecca kissed the top of his head. Yes, sweetheart, we won. He pulled back, searching her face for reassurance. So, we're safe now? Rebecca smiled softly. We are, and we always will be. Though the battle had been hard fought and justice had been served, Rebecca knew that their journey was not yet over. There would be appeals, new trials, and efforts to bring even more people to justice. But tonight, she allowed herself to savor the victory, to hold her son close, and to let the feeling of hope settle in her heart. The days following the verdict were filled with both celebration and contemplation. Though justice had been served, Rebecca knew that the wounds inflicted by the crimes would take years to heal. The sentencing hearings were scheduled, and discussions about systemic reforms had begun on a national level. The case had shaken the country, prompting investigations into other hospitals and child welfare organizations suspected of similar misconduct. Elijah, now officially recognized as Rebecca's son, was slowly adapting to his new life. Though he still had moments of anxiety, the nightmares were becoming less frequent, and his trust in Rebecca deepened with each passing day. For the first time in years, he had a home, one where he felt safe, loved, and truly wanted. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Rebecca took Elijah to a quiet park near their new home. They sat on a wooden bench, watching children play in the distance. Elijah took a deep breath, staring at the bright sky. "Mom?" he asked hesitantly. Rebecca turned to him, her eyes warm. "Yes, sweetheart." He hesitated before speaking. Do you think I'll ever feel normal? Like other kids?" Rebecca reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Elijah, what happened to you wasn't fair. It was cruel and it was wrong. But you are so much more than what they did to you. You're strong, you're kind, and you are loved. Normal doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means learning how to live despite it, and you're already doing that." Elijah nodded, absorbing her words. He looked up at her, his expression softer, more at peace. "I like that." Rebecca and Elijah slowly built a new routine together. They decorated his room, picking out posters of his favorite superheroes. They cooked meals together, turning even the simplest moments into cherished memories. And every night before bed, Rebecca read to him, a tradition she had dreamed of sharing with her child for years. Meanwhile, Marcus and his team continued their work, dismantling the remnants of the child trafficking ring. More arrests were made, more families reunited. Rebecca, though no longer at the center of the case, remained involved in advocacy efforts, determined to prevent such horrors from happening again. One evening, Elijah and Rebecca attended a candlelight vigil for families still searching for their lost children. As the warm glow of candlelight flickered across the faces of grieving parents, Rebecca felt the enormity of what had been accomplished and what was still left to do. Elijah stood beside her, his small fingers wrapped around hers. "Mom," he whispered, looking at the flickering flames, "do you think the other kids will find their parents too?" Rebecca knelt beside him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "I hope so, sweetheart, and if there's anything we can do to help, we will." As they stood together in the glow of the vigil, Rebecca realized that this was not just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of something greater. A new chapter, a new life, a new purpose. She had spent years seeking justice, but in the end, she had found something even more profound. Love, family, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. Elijah leaned against her, and for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt truly whole. They had won their battle, and now they would embrace their future together.